Welcome to Anatomy Simplified. So today we are going to look at the topography of the brain. Now, a quick look at the nervous system. We realize that the nervous system is composed of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is composed of the brain and the spinal cord. And so today we're going to look at the topography of the brain. So this is a picture of the human brain. And we realize that the human brain is composed of two hemispheres. The hemispheres are separated by a fissure in the middle, and this is known as the longitudinal fissure. And it is oriented in the sagittal section from posterior to anterior. And the brain is therefore separated into two hemispheres, one on the left and one on the right. Each of those hemispheres has several external features that we are about to discuss. First of all, we will notice that each hemisphere has three surfaces. We have the superolateral surface. We have the superolateral surface. This is the surface that you're able to see once you look at the brain on the lateral aspect, and it is convex and related to the cranial vault. And we have the medial surface, which shows when you separate the two hemispheres. You separate one hemisphere from the other, and you'll be able to notice that you are going to see the other hemisphere in the middle, in the median aspect, and this is therefore the medial surface. And there is the inferior surface of the cerebral hemisphere. This inferior surface is irregular, and it is divided into two surfaces. The inferior surface is divided into the anterior orbital surface, which is related to the orbital, this is the orbital surface, and the posterior tentorial surface, which is related to the tentorium cerebelli. Those are the surfaces of the brain, the surfaces of the cerebral hemispheres. Then you realize that each of these hemispheres has four borders. We have the superior medial border. This is the superior medial border, and the superior medial border will separate the superior lateral surface from the medial surface. And you notice that it has the inferior lateral border, which separates the superolateral surface from the inferior surface. So this here is the inferiolateral border. And you find that the anterior part of this border is called the superciliary border. The anterior part of this border is known as the superciliary border. And then each cerebral hemisphere has a medial orbital border. This separates the medial surface from the orbital surface. This is the medial surface, and this is the orbital surface. This border is what we're referring to as the medial orbital border. We have the medial occipital border, which separates the medial surface from the tentorial surface. Those are the surfaces, those are the borders of the brain. The other thing you need to take note of is that each cerebral hemisphere has three pores. First of all, we have the frontal pole and the temporal pole, and these are the anterior-most portions of the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe, respectively. And the third pole is the occipital pole. The occipital pole is the posterior-most end of the brain of the cerebral hemisphere. So those are the external surfaces, the surfaces, the borders, and the pores of each cerebral hemisphere. We will also discuss the some of the features that you're going to see on each hemisphere. One of those features is that each lobe is divided into each hemisphere is divided into 4 lobes, and each lobe has surface projections and sulci. These surface projections or convolutions are known as gyri. This is a gyrus, this is a gyrus, this is a gyrus, this is a gyrus. All these projections are known as gyri. And separating these gyri from one another, we find the sulci. All these sulci have different names and functions, and they separate several gyri from one another. We will also notice that within each cerebral hemisphere, you're going to find white matter, which we're going to talk about in another video. Today, we shall focus on the external surface of each cerebral hemisphere. So one cerebral hemisphere, as earlier mentioned, is made up of 4 lobes. These lobes are named according to the bones of the cranium that they underlie. And for example, we have the first lobe here is known as the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is separated from the parietal lobe by a median sulcus. This sulcus is known as the central sulcus. It separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. That is to say, posterior to the frontal lobe, we have the parietal lobe. On the lateral aspect, lateral to the frontal and the parietal lobe, we find the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is separated from the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe by the lateral sulcus, or the sulcus, the lateral sulcus of Sylvius. And the 4th lobe we are going to notice that each hemisphere has is known as the occipital lobe. This is the posterior-most portion of the brain, and it is separated from the parietal lobe and the occipital lobe by a plane that is known as the parietal occipital sulcus, or the parietal occipital plane. And those are the lobes of each hemisphere. The other thing that we will look at is we are going to name some of the major gyri. So on the frontal lobe, you find a gyrus that is immediately anterior to the central sulcus. This is known as the premotor gyrus, the precentral gyrus, or the primary motor gyrus. And immediately posterior to the central sulcus, you're going to find the post-central gyrus, or the somatosensory area. And so these two are some of the major gyri that you are going to find. And you are going to name all these gyri in the next video that we are going to look at. So these are some of the features of the cerebral cortex. Thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe and always receive notifications, like and share. Make sure you follow us. Bye.